We are fairly good at solving problems when we need to, Nina said from her seat. Her voice was flat and calm, the tone of someone reading what the data allowed. Especially when people tell us something cannot be done. That tends to focus us. A ripple of laughter moved through the chamber. Not warm laughter. The kind that belongs to people who have already decided the subject of their amusement is beneath serious consideration. It was the sound of comfort, of a room settling back into its familiar hierarchy. I was watching Marcus Webb's face while it happened. He was not embarrassed. He was not searching for a diplomatic response. He was not performing the carefully managed frustration of a representative trying to maintain dignity under provocation. He simply watched the room laugh, and something in the quality of his patience, the weight of it, made the small, experienced part of my brain send up a quiet signal that I chose, to my lasting regret, to ignore. When someone lets you mock them without flinching, one of two things is true. They do not understand the insult, or they do not need to respond to it. Marcus Webb did not look like a man who missed things. The formal presentation consumed the morning in the way that formal diplomatic presentations always do, through a combination of ritual posturing, carefully worded declarations of cooperation that everyone in the room understood to be theater, and the kind of speeches that sound meaningful while containing almost no actual information. The humans sat through 4 hours of it without complaint, without visible impatience, occasionally exchanging glances that I could not read. During the midday recess, the delegations dispersed to Meridian 7's recreational sector. I should explain something about Hastron culture, because it matters here. We are, by our own reckoning and the general acknowledgement of most species who have encountered us, a warrior people. Our physical capabilities are a point of genuine cultural pride, not merely vanity. Our security personnel are selected through competition, their positions maintained through demonstrated excellence. Physical superiority is not just something we value, it is foundational to how we understand status, which is why Corin, our security chief, spent recesses in the station's physical training facility. 2.5 meters of disciplined muscle, decorated service history, and the particular confidence that belongs to someone who has never encountered a serious physical challenge. He was working through his training regimen when Nina Torres walked in. She was in exercise clothes now, simple gray, nothing remarkable, and she moved through the equipment area with the casual ease of someone completely comfortable in her own body. She acknowledged the room with a nod, and went to examine the available equipment with mild interest. Corin watched her across the floor. Then he did what Corin always did when given an audience and an opportunity. "New species," he called out, loud enough that the entire facility turned. "Tell me, does your kind require physical conditioning, or are you simply naturally this small?" The laughter that followed was the same as the laughter in the chamber earlier. Comfortable, certain of its own position. Nina looked at him. Her expression held no offense, no defensiveness, not even particular interest. She looked, if anything, mildly curious, the way one might look at a piece of unfamiliar equipment before deciding how to engage with it. "We do regular training," she said. "Keeps us sharp." Corin set down his weights with theatrical emphasis. "Perhaps you'd like to try some of our equipment. I'd be happy to adjust it to a more manageable level for you. 50 kilograms to start, say. 50 kilograms, the weight our children use for developmental conditioning." The insult was deliberate and obvious, and I watched Nina receive it with the same expression she'd worn throughout, that neutral, considering quiet, and then she walked over to the weight rack. She looked at what Corin had been working with. 400 kilograms. "Sure," she said. "I'll give it a shot." I should have left at that point. Looking back, there was something in the way she said it, not hesitant, not nervous, not even particularly eager, just ready, in the way a professional is ready for something they've done many times before. That should have told me everything. I stayed. Nina positioned herself at the station, took the bar, and lifted 400 kilograms cleanly off the rack. No preparation, no visible strain, no build-up of effort or drama. She lifted it the way you might pick up a bag from a table, and the room went so quiet so suddenly that I could hear the station's ventilation system. "Hey!" she said, raising and lowering the weight in controlled repetitions. "Nice equipment. Good quality." Corin's face traveled through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, disbelief, something approaching anger, more disbelief. "That is 400 kilograms," he said, as though she might not have noticed. Yeah. Another smooth repetition. Is that a significant amount for your species? For context, 400 kilograms represents peak lifting capacity for a Hastron male in prime physical condition, following years of dedicated training. The galactic average across spacefaring species sits at perhaps 250 kilograms. The Krellian rock breakers, who mass 4 times what a human does and whose musculature incorporates hydraulic systems, top out around 600. Nina Torres weighed perhaps 70 kilograms. She was lifting nearly 6 times her own body weight with the casual ease of someone performing a warm-up. The station's medical officer, Dr. Van, had appeared at some point. He was waving a scanner with increasing agitation. The gravity compensation must be malfunctioning, he announced, to general agreement, because that was the only explanation that preserved the world as everyone understood it. Do you want me to try something else? Nina asked. Corin, his entire professional self-image under quiet assault, pointed at the grip strength measurement device. The Meridian 7 record was held by a Krellian at 8,000 newtons. Corin's personal best stood at 5,200. Try that, he said. She wrapped her hand around the sensor grip and applied pressure. The machine counted upward. 5,000, 6, 7, 8,000, matching the existing record without any visible change in her expression. 9,000. The readout climbed past the device's previously confirmed maximum and kept going. At 9,400 newtons, something inside the machine failed with a sharp crack. Sparks scattered from the side panel. Nina released the grip immediately and looked genuinely apologetic. Oh, sorry about that. Is it expensive? We can cover repairs. The silence that followed had a different quality than the silence after she'd lifted the weights. That had been shock. This was something deeper, the specific silence of people whose foundational assumptions are being surgically removed one at a time. Dr. Van scanned her repeatedly, muttering, Muscle density doesn't work this way. Bone structure cannot support these load tolerances. The leverage ratios alone. I'm pretty average, actually, Nina said, with what appeared to be genuine discomfort at the attention. There are people back home who could bench press me along with that weight. Dr. Van announced, firmly and with the specific confidence of a man who needs very much to believe what he is saying, that the equipment had clearly malfunctioned. Full diagnostics would be run. Recalibration was obviously necessary. I looked at Corin. He had the expression of someone who has just had something taken from him without quite understanding what or how. We filed out of the training facility in subdued silence, and I spent a 3-hour gap before the afternoon session sitting with a growing, uncomfortable recognition that if the humans had been understating their physical capabilities, they might be understating other things too. The afternoon session's agenda was planetary colonization rights, nominally procedural, the kind of item that occupies a predictable block of diplomatic calendar while negotiators maneuver for position on matters they actually care about. The humans had submitted a proposal requesting colonization privileges for 7 systems in the Outer Rim, marginal territories that most established civilizations had evaluated and declined as too hostile for practical development. Ambassador Frex reviewed a proposal with the attention of someone who has already decided what answer they are going to give and is merely performing consideration for protocol's sake. 7 systems, he observed. That is quite ambitious for a civilization currently occupying a single planet. We are planning ahead, Marcus replied. Our population is growing, and we would like to establish established colonies within 50 years. The systems we have selected match our settlement parameters. Ah, yes, your settlement parameters. Frex made a sound that his translation device rendered as gentle amusement. Let me see. Oxygen, nitrogen, atmosphere, liquid water, surface temperatures between -40 and +50 degrees Celsius. He paused. Those are remarkably broad tolerances. Most species operate comfortably within a range of 15 degrees. Claiming a 90-degree operational window seems somewhat optimistic. Several delegates voiced agreement. The Yulthai observer emitted a whistling sound that translated as something between skepticism and laughter. Dr. Park glanced at Marcus, who gave the small gesture I had already learned to recognize as go ahead. The scientist stood, and with the particular energy of someone who deals primarily in evidence, touched his tablet. The chamber's projection system filled with an image of Earth, slowly rotating, luminous, improbably beautiful for a world we were about to learn a great deal more about. Blue oceans, green landmasses, white atmospheric systems spiraling in complex patterns. This is our home planet, Dr. Park said. Human settlements currently exist on every major landmass across every latitude on the surface. I'll show you the temperature distribution. The image shifted to thermal mapping. The equatorial regions burned in deep reds and oranges. The polar areas registered in sharp blues and purples. Between them stretched every color of the spectrum, painted across the landmasses in complex variation. Our equatorial regions reach 50 degrees Celsius during summer months, he continued. Our polar regions drop to -60, sometimes -70 during winter. Both zones contain permanent human populations, not research stations, cities, with millions of residents. The chamber had gone still. That is biologically impossible, someone said. I believe it was one of the Theron delegates. Protein structures would denature across that thermal range. Cellular regulation alone. You would think so, Dr. Park agreed pleasantly. Humans evolved on a planet with extreme seasonal variation and highly diverse climate zones. We developed adaptive biological responses over time, subcutaneous insulation systems, evaporative cooling mechanisms, variable metabolic regulation. We are reasonably good at thermoregulation across a wide range. He touched his tablet again, and new data streams appeared in projection, atmospheric pressure readings, altitude distributions, population density maps correlated with environmental conditions. Earth's surface pressure runs at approximately 100 kilopascals at sea level. We have permanent human populations living and working at altitudes where pressure drops to 60 kilopascals. We also have populations at below sea level settlements where pressure exceeds 110. Our diving specialists undergo training that includes brief functional exposure to 500 kilopascals or more. Ambassador Frex, for the first time since the summit had opened, seemed to have lost track of his condescension. He was staring at his data screen with the expression of someone doing arithmetic that keeps producing the wrong answer. You are telling this council, he said slowly, that your species functions across a pressure differential of nearly 10 to 1 and a temperature variation exceeding 100 degrees. Not comfortably across the whole range, Dr. Park clarified, with what I would come to recognize as the human habit of providing accurate qualifications even when those qualifications made the primary statement more alarming rather than less. We prefer moderate conditions when available, but humans can remain functional across those extremes. It's a product of where we evolved. I heard myself speak before I had consciously decided to ask the question. Your planet must be tectonically stable. Settlement across those climate zones would be impossible otherwise. Dr. Park looked at me, and I saw something in his expression then, not pity, but a kind of careful consideration, as though he was deciding how much of the truth was appropriate to deliver at once. He chose all of it. Earth has 15 major tectonic plates in active motion. We experience hundreds of significant seismic events annually. We have regular volcanic eruptions, tsunami events, and a weather system powered by the extreme thermal differential between our equatorial and polar regions, which generates atmospheric conditions capable of significant structural damage. He pulled up footage. I watched a wall of ocean water 30 meters tall collapse onto a coastline. I watched a rotating atmospheric column tear through structures that had been engineered for stability. I watched rivers of molten rock pour down mountain faces while evacuation vehicles moved in organized streams along designated routes below. We lose thousands of people annually to natural disasters, he continued in the same level tone he might use to discuss agricultural output statistics. We developed early warning infrastructure, emergency response systems, and construction standards engineered for seismic tolerance. It is a standard component of living on Earth. You adapt to your environment or you do not survive in it. The Yulthar Observer's translation device produced a sound that rendered as horrified bewilderment. That is a catastrophic world. Why would your species remain on it rather than evacuating to safer territory? Dr. Park appeared genuinely puzzled by the question, the way someone looks when asked why they love something that seems obviously worth loving. Because it is home, he said. Yes, it is dangerous sometimes, but it is also the most beautiful place any of us have ever seen. Besides, and here a small, quiet smile appeared, if you grow up managing earthquakes and hurricanes, everything else tends to seem rather manageable by comparison. The realization moved through the chamber in slow waves, reaching each delegation at slightly different times as the mathematics resolved themselves. We had been imagining humans as a fragile species stumbling toward the stars from a sheltered world. We had been profoundly, completely wrong. They had not come from a garden. They had come from a crucible. The biological capabilities we had witnessed in the training facility were not anomalies. They were adaptations, solutions, evolved over millions of years to a planet that had never made survival easy. Frex's cluster had stopped humming. He was staring at his screen. "This changes the colonization parameters substantially," he said, his tone drained of its earlier certainty. "If your species can tolerate these conditions, then the outer rim systems you requested are not marginal territories." Marcus Webb smiled, and for the first time since the summit had opened, it reached his eyes. "Yes, Ambassador," he said. "We know. That is why we asked for them." The power in the room had shifted, not through demands or displays of force, simply through the quiet, patient delivery of accurate information to people who had been entirely wrong about what they were looking at. The humans had not wanted scraps. They had been claiming territory that no one else could use, in systems that everyone else had written off as too dangerous to bother with, and they had done it by simply telling us the truth about where they came from. The session after the colonization revelation broke differently than the ones before it. The comfortable hierarchy of the chamber had developed fractures, and into those fractures pressed something that diplomatic proceedings are specifically designed to suppress: genuine uncertainty. General Thrace of the Hastron High Command chose this moment to establish his relevance. Thrace was old guard in the fullest sense, decorated in the border conflict against the Kelvich Consortium 2 cycles back, possessed of 3 strategic excellence commendations, and the particular certainty of a military commander who has spent decades being the most dangerous thing in any room he enters. He rose to his full 2.5 meters and addressed the chamber in the voice he reserves for reminding people that he commands a battle fleet. "I must formally object to the human colonization proposal," he announced. "The systems they are requesting border Hastron territorial space. We cannot permit an unknown military presence to establish itself adjacent to our core worlds without understanding what we are dealing with." "Ambassador Thrace," Marcus responded, "we have no hostile intentions toward the Hastron Collective or any member of this council. Our proposed colonies would be entirely civilian in nature." "So you say," Thrace replied, and his tone made clear that he considered this response about as informative as a blank page. "But how does this council verify the military capabilities of a species about which we know almost nothing? You could establish those colonies and use them as forward staging positions. It has precedent in galactic history." "That is a fair concern," Marcus said. The words were straightforward. What was remarkable was the absence of any defensive edge in them, just honest acknowledgement, as though being asked to justify yourself was simply part of the process rather than an indignity. "What would you like to know about our defensive capabilities?" Defensive. I caught the word. Filed it. Did not understand it yet. Thrace displayed his teeth, which among Hastron communicates a complex mixture of challenge and invitation. "Let us begin simply. What weapon systems does your species currently deploy?" Marcus glanced at Nina. Nina shrugged, that particular shrug that communicates why not, might as well, and Marcus turned back to the chamber. "I should start by saying," he began, "that humans have been engaged in organized conflict for the entirety of our recorded history. It is, somewhat unfortunately, one of our defining characteristics. We have become quite sophisticated at it." Several delegates exchanged glances. The Yulthar observer made a sound that translated ambiguously between appreciation and unease. "Our current doctrine centers on conventional munitions," Marcus continued. "Kinetic weapons, precision explosive ordnance, directed energy systems in development stages. Standard capabilities, I think, by galactic standards. And nuclear weapons, of course." Thrace leaned forward. "Fission-based weapons. Yes, your initial data submission referenced atomic technology." "We have had nuclear weapons for approximately 200 years, Marcus said, and something in his tone shifted slightly, not dismissive, exactly, but carrying particular quality of someone referencing something they have thoroughly moved past. "We used to consider them quite significant. Civilization-ending deterrents. These days we classify them as primitive. We move beyond them." The chamber absorbed this. You move beyond weapons capable of destroying cities. I asked. They are imprecise, Marcus said, with the patience of someone explaining something that should be obvious. Too much collateral damage. Too much long-term environmental contamination. When your objective is a specific target, nuclear weapons are actually quite inefficient, so we develop better options. Dr. Park opened his tablet, and I felt a specific premonition, the awareness that what was coming next would not improve my emotional state, and prove correct. Our current conventional systems include hypersonic delivery vehicles operating at 15 times the speed of sound, he said, reading from his data in the same matter-of-fact tone he had used to describe earthquake frequencies. Thermobaric devices capable of generating sustained pressure waves sufficient to collapse reinforced structures across significant areas. Rail-based kinetic weaponry that can deliver a tungsten projectile through 8 meters of hardened composite material from orbital distance. The chamber had gone silent again, but this time the silence had a physical quality to it, like pressure. These are defensive systems, someone asked weakly. That depends on your perspective, Nina said. She had been quiet since the gym, but when she spoke now, the room listened without quite deciding to. Our philosophy is that the best defense is ensuring that no one makes a rational calculation in favor of attacking you. So yes, we built weapons designed to make war catastrophically expensive for anyone who starts one. That counts as defensive in our thinking. Thrace was no longer performing confidence. No species develops destructive capability to this level without deploying it. Where is your evidence of conflict? Where are the documented wars? Marcus went still. The corporate smile, that careful, professional tool, disappeared. What replaced it was something unguarded and cold and honest in a way that none of his measured diplomatic delivery had been. General, he said quietly, in the last century alone, humanity fought 2 global conflicts that each killed tens of millions of people. We have engaged in regional wars, civil conflicts, ideological struggles across every continent we inhabit. We have bombed our own cities. We have burned our own agricultural land. We have poisoned our own water systems in pursuit of tactical advantage. He paused, and the chamber held its breath. We learned extraordinary lessons about what escalation without constraint produces. So we built international legal frameworks, established war crime tribunals, negotiated weapons reduction treaties, not because we had become peaceful, general, but because we understood, in specific and measurable terms, exactly how much damage we were capable of inflicting on each other, and decided we would prefer not to do it again if alternatives existed. Tens of millions, Thrace repeated. His voice had lost its authority somehow, like a structure with its load-bearing element removed. You absorbed casualties of that magnitude and continued fighting. We are persistent, Marcus said. It is simultaneously our greatest strength and our most significant flaw. Dr. Park had been preparing something on his tablet. He brought it up now, and what filled the chamber's projection space was history, raw, unfiltered, the archaeological record of a species that had spent millennia finding new ways to destroy itself and new ways to survive the destruction. Cities reduced to geometric rubble. Landscapes created into alien topography. The specific horror of organized industrial violence applied at continental scale. And through all of it, movement, humans, continuing, rebuilding, adapting, refusing to stop. This is a period we call the Second World War, Dr. Park narrated, his voice remaining steady with what I was beginning to understand was professional discipline rather than absence of feeling. 70 to 85 million casualties over 6 years of conflict. We used every weapon available to us, including, at the war's conclusion, 2 atomic devices deployed against civilian population centers. You used those weapons against your own species. Frex's voice had shed every layer of condescension. What remained was something that sounded close to horror. Different nations, Marcus said, and there was something terrible in the simplicity of the clarification. We were not unified as a species at that point. Unification came later, after we accurately calculated how close we were to complete self-annihilation. The Cold War period helped focus priorities considerably, Dr. Park added. The Cold War, I said, because apparently my capacity to stop asking questions had failed entirely. 40-year ideological conflict between the 2 dominant post-war power structures, Marcus explained. Both sides developed nuclear arsenals sufficient to destroy human civilization multiple times over. We came within minutes of full launch on at least 3 separate confirmed occasions. He said it the way you might mention a near miss in traffic. The casual acknowledgement of catastrophe that was not allowed to happen, filed under close calls in the historical record. And your response, said Thrace, slowly, as though working through something he was not sure he wanted to fully understand, to almost exterminating yourselves, was to develop more effective weapons. We also developed better diplomatic infrastructure and international cooperation systems, Dr. Park said. The 2 tracks ran in parallel. We got significantly smarter about when and how force is appropriate. But no, we did not stop weapons development. We refined it. Consider it applied learning. Applied learning. They had treated the near extinction of their species as a curriculum. I looked around the chamber and saw the same realization on every face. We had been managing these people like a minor diplomatic obligation, newcomers to be processed, evaluated, slotted into the appropriate tier of galactic hierarchy. We had mocked them, condescended to them, treated their history as the awkward early chapters of a civilization that had not yet found its footing. But their history was not awkward. It was terrifying. They had been forged in conflict at a scale that made our worst military engagements look like regional disputes. They had built weapons of collective annihilation and then developed a philosophical framework for not using them, not because they could not, but because they understood consequences in a way that only comes from having lived through them. And they had survived. They had survived, and they had come here, 3 of them, smiling patiently while we talked down to them. Marcus broke the silence that had settled over the chamber like sediment. So, he said, his tone returning to that careful, professional neutrality regarding those colonization rights. I think we can all agree it makes considerably more sense to provide humanity with uninhabited space for expansion rather than having us look more carefully at occupied territory. It was not quite a threat. The grammar was too passive, the delivery too controlled. But everyone in that room understood exactly what had just been said. General Thrace nodded slowly, carefully, with the specific deliberateness of a man removing his hand from something hot. I will recommend approval to the Hastron High Command. The objections dissolved. Not one delegate in the chamber wanted to discover whether the humans had been exaggerating. They had not been. We should have left it there. Any species with adequate self-preservation instincts would have processed what we had been shown, approved the proposal, and spent the following weeks quietly reassessing every assumption they had built their foreign policy on. But Ambassador Threx had not quite finished. His cluster had been conferring during the recess following Marcus's very politely delivered suggestion about territorial generosity, the 17 bodies humming with a particular frequency of a mind that has not yet accepted what it has been shown. When he spake, his voice carried the specific desperation of someone who needs very badly for something to be a bluff. I move that this council request a practical demonstration of human military capability, he announced. Before approving territorial grants of this scale, we must verify these claims. Surely the human delegation will not object to a simple proof of capability. Marcus looked at Nina. Nina looked at Dr. Park. Dr. Park sighed, closed his tablet, and set it down on the table in front of him. That sigh, I have thought about it many times since. It was the sound of people who had hoped, genuinely hoped, that it would not come to this, who had prepared for it anyway, because they had been watching us for 30 years and understood us fairly well by this point. We can arrange a demonstration, Marcus said. His voice had taken on a quality I had not heard from him before, careful, measured, the tone of someone handling something that requires respect. I want to be clear that we would prefer not to. There is a reason we did not lead with this. We insist, said Threx, and several other delegates voiced agreement. We were all fools. 2 hours later, the delegations were assembled on Meridian 7's observation deck, facing the designated testing zone 300,000 kilometers distant. We had been watching the human ship maneuver into position, a single vessel, the Ranger, a frigate class that looked, honestly, unremarkable. Perhaps 200 meters in length, sleek construction, no visible weapon emplacements. It had the silhouette of a fast courier rather than anything designed for combat. That is their demonstration vessel, Corin murmured beside me. His voice had not fully recovered from the gym incident. It looks like a transport. The Ranger began with the standard assessment protocol, movement and agility testing. The station's tactical officer called readings as they appeared. Acceleration, 300 meters per second squared. A pause. Turning radius at full burn, 20 kilometers. Another pause, longer. Reaction time, 4 seconds. The voice changed quality. Wait! That cannot be. Recalibrating sensors. The sensors were not malfunctioning. We watched the Ranger move through space the way living things move, not the calculated trajectories of ships operating within understood physical parameters, but something fluid and responsive that treated inertia as a suggestion rather than a law. 90-degree direction changes executed at full acceleration. Stops from maximum speed covering distances that should have produced structural failure. The kind of maneuvering that, for any crew we understood the biology of, would have distributed the organic matter inside the hull very evenly across the interior surfaces. Their inertial dampening technology is beyond anything we have, someone said softly, or their crews can survive G-forces that would kill every species in this room. Probably both. Weapons test commencing. The Ranger's pilot's voice came through the observation deck's audio feed. He sounded, I will never forget this, bored, the tone of a professional running a routine check before filing the paperwork. The target was an iron-nickel mining asteroid approximately 2 kilometers across, large enough to constitute a legitimate test, small enough that eliminating it would not create navigational complications. The Ranger oriented toward the asteroid. No launch sequence, no visible beam, no targeting sequence that our instruments could track. Only a brief, sharp energy signature on the tactical sensors, a spike that appeared and vanished in less than a second. Then the asteroid ceased to exist. Not shattered, not fragmented, not broken into the debris field that an explosive impact would create. The 2-kilometer chunk of metal and rock simply stopped being solid matter. Its molecular bond dissolved simultaneously throughout its entire volume, replaced in less than a second by an expanding cloud of vapor so fine it was nearly invisible against the star field. What? Said Corin. The tactical officer's voice had become strange, stretched thin over something it was clearly not equipped to process. Energy signature consistent with directed particle beam weapon. Power levels exceeding anything in our database by... A pause. I cannot calculate the factor. The focusing precision required to achieve molecular dissolution across that volume. Another pause. The waste heat alone should have compromised the firing vessel. Structurally, this should not be possible. The Ranger hung in space beyond the dissipating vapor cloud, completely undamaged, waiting. Its pilot had not said anything since the test. There was nothing to say. That was a frigate-class vessel, not a capital ship, not a weapons platform or a dedicated combat vessel. A frigate, the kind of ship any spacefaring species uses for patrol duty and courier operations and the minor diplomatic escort assignments that nobody considers worth deploying serious hardware for. Marcus was standing at the observation window near me. The professional smile was gone entirely now, replaced by something tired and honest. We did try to tell you, he said quietly. Everything we shared was true. The difficulty was that you were all so thoroughly certain we were primitive that you heard exaggeration in accurate reporting. You heard boasting where we were, if anything, understating. Understating. The word landed with a specific weight. How far ahead are you? I asked. Compared to the rest of the galactic community, technologically. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the place where the asteroid had been. We genuinely are not certain, he said. We have only been operating in space for a little over a century, so we do not have extensive basis of comparison. But Earth is a difficult world, and we have been fighting each other for most of our history, and both of those things create strong pressure toward innovation. Problems that other species may never have encountered drove us to develop solutions that apparently do not exist elsewhere. He paused. We may be ahead in some areas, almost certainly behind in others. We are still learning what the landscape looks like. Ambassador Threx's cluster had achieved a frequency I had never heard them produce before, something high and thin that his translation device rendered haltingly as distress. I move for immediate approval of all human territorial claims as originally submitted, he said. His voice was no longer steady. No modifications. Full colonization rights. Granted. The vote was unanimous. The fastest resolution in the Council's recorded history. Not because the delegates had been persuaded by argument or won over by negotiation, but because every being in that observation room had just watched a single frigate dissolve a 2-kilometer asteroid and knew, with absolute clarity, that there was no version of the future in which testing the species' patience was a reasonable strategy. The treaty negotiations took 4 to 5 minutes. For context, similar agreements typically require weeks of careful bargaining, counterproposal, revision, and the kind of strategic delay that diplomats use to extract maximum value from every clause. This one took 4 to 5 minutes, and the humans received everything in their original proposal, every territorial grant, every trade privilege, every boundary definition, the technology exchange framework on their preferred terms, and a seat on the inner council that had previously been reserved for founding members who had spent centuries earning it. No one objected. No one suggested amendments. No one attempted to negotiate better terms for themselves. The council simply gave the humans everything they had asked for on the first day and hoped, collectively, that this would be remembered favorably. Marcus signed the documents with the same composed professionalism he had maintained from the moment he walked through the chamber doors, like a man who had known exactly what the signature would say before he arrived. Because he had. They all had. I found him in the departure corridor as the delegation was preparing to leave. He was reviewing transport schedules with the unhurried focus of someone whose work here was complete. Nina was running equipment checks with precise efficiency. Dr. Park was organizing his data files with the satisfaction of an academic whose research has just been validated at the largest possible scale. 3 people. They had walked into the most significant diplomatic chamber in the known galaxy, endured 3 days of condescension and dismissal, and walked out having restructured galactic politics without raising their voices once. "You knew," I said. "Not a question. You knew we would dismiss you, mock you, push back, demand proof. You planned for every stage of it." Marcus looked up from his tablet, and for the first time, the smile that appeared on his face was neither the professional tool nor the tired honesty of the observation deck. It was something warmer, recognition, perhaps, the expression of someone who has found, in an unexpected place, a person worth speaking to honestly. "Velcro," he said, "trade negotiator for the Hastron Collective. 14 cycles of experience. You have a good reputation. Fair dealer, careful thinker, not prone to assumptions." A pause. "Usually." That stung, as it was meant to, as it was also entirely fair. To answer your question directly, yes, we had a reasonably accurate picture of how this would proceed. We have been monitoring galactic communications for approximately 30 years before making official contact. We studied your cultures, your political structures, your histories, your patterns of behavior toward newcomers. We knew most established species would perceive us as primitive and act accordingly. So you prepared for it by concealing how advanced you actually are. By not volunteering information that would cause panic before we had established any relational foundation, Marcus corrected, with a gentle precision of someone who cares about accurate framing. Everything we told you was true. We simply did not lead with our most alarming capabilities. That seemed like poor diplomacy for a first introduction. Nina walked over, shouldering her pack with the effortless movement I now understood differently than I had 3 days ago. "Transport is prepped, Marcus." "Thank you." He turned back to me. "We really do not want conflict with anyone. Velcro. We want room to expand, fair trading partnerships, and, I will be completely honest, better food options. Station catering across the galaxy is uniformly terrible, and I cannot explain why." Something about the sincerity of the last complaint made me laugh despite myself. "You could take it," I said quietly, when the laughter had passed. "Half the galaxy, maybe more, before anyone mounted a coordinated response. You could." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," he said, "probably. We have thought about it. I will not pretend otherwise. It has been discussed." He looked out the corridor window at the stars. "But here is something you learn when you study human history as carefully as we had to study it to survive it. We have been the conquerors. We have been the empire, the dominant power, the species with overwhelming advantage pressing its boot into everyone else. We know exactly what that produces. We know how it ends, not for the conquered, but for the conquerors. Badly, always badly, eventually." He picked up his bag, so we decided on a different approach. Good neighbors, reliable allies, the species that is somewhat frightening to think about too carefully, but whose word is absolutely solid once given. The species you want beside you when things become genuinely difficult, because we do not leave and we do not break. He extended his hand. That still sound good. I looked at his hand. This gesture, I now understood, that his species used to formalize agreement, to indicate trust, to bridge the space between strangers. I thought about what I now knew that hand was capable of. I took it. It sounds good, I said. They left in the early evening cycle, their shuttle departing from Base 7 with the quiet efficiency of people who had accomplished what they came to do. I watched the Ranger catch light at the edge of the observation window and then fold itself into the particular distortion of an FTL transition, gone in less than a second, as though they had never been still. I filed my report that night. Professional, factual, thorough, every data point documented, every incident recorded in the precise language that diplomatic dispatches require. But at the end, after the formal content was complete, I added a personal note for the Hastron High Command. I have kept a copy of it. It read, "Recommend extending the human delegation every courtesy and accommodation available to established council members. These are not the primitive newcomers we anticipated. Their physical capabilities, technological development, and historical experience with large-scale conflicts significantly exceed anything in our assessment models. Strongly advise against any form of military, economic, or diplomatic pressure. Do not test their patience under any circumstances. Do not make the mistake we made and force them to demonstrate what they are capable of. The demonstration, once given, cannot be taken back. They came here to be neighbors. They want trade and territory and perhaps decent food. They are willing to follow the rules and honor their agreements and participate in the council in good faith. Let them." Corin asked me later, over drinks in the station bar while we waited for our departure window, whether I thought the humans would eventually become a threat. Whether, once they had expanded and developed and accumulated the resources and position that their capabilities made essentially inevitable, they would turn the power they held toward domination. I thought about Marcus Webb watching the empty space where an asteroid used to be, looking tired. I thought about 30 years of patient listening before they said hello. I thought about the specific way he had said we decided on a different approach. Not we cannot. Not we would not dare. But we decided. The language of a choice made consciously by people who had fully understood their alternatives. "I don't know," I said. "Maybe. It's possible." Corin waited. "But here's what I keep coming back to," I said. "If they wanted to be conquerors, they wouldn't have spent 3 decades learning our languages and our customs and our histories before making contact. They wouldn't have sat in the back of that chamber for 3 days and let us call them primitive and mock their capabilities and demand proof of their worth. They wouldn't have come with 3 people and a data tablet and the kind of patience that can only come from being absolutely certain of the outcome." I looked into my drink. They would have just arrived and taken what they wanted. They are capable of that. They know it. We know it now. And they decided not to. I set the drink down. Some species talk bigger than they can deliver. Corin, I've spent 14 cycles sorting those species from the ones who mean what they say. I paused. Humans do the opposite. They understate everything. Their planet, their biology, their history, their weapons, all of it. And they wait, with what I can only describe as infinite patience, for you to be smart enough not to make them prove it. The station light shifted to the low amber of evening cycle. We were not smart enough. They prove it anyway. And what I am choosing to believe, what I think the evidence actually supports, is that they genuinely meant what they said about being good neighbors. I thought of Marcus Webb's hand in mine, the specific careful way I had taken it, and what it had felt like to commit to something in full understanding of what the other party was capable of. "They are the most dangerous thing in this galaxy," I said quietly, "and they are trying very hard to be kind. I think we should take them at their word. And I think we should make absolutely certain that we never, under any circumstances, give them a reason to stop." The stars outside the observation window were the same stars that had been there before the summit began. The galaxy looked unchanged. But the galaxy was not unchanged. It had acquired something new, something that did not fit any category in our existing model for how civilizations behaved. A species that had clawed its way up from a world that had spent millions of years trying to end them. that had fought itself to the edge of extinction more than once and taken notes each time, that had built weapons capable of dissolving mountains and then developed a philosophical framework to keep them in their cases, that had watched us for 30 years and learned our languages and our fears and our patterns and arrived, finally, with 3 people and a modest data case and a willingness to be patient with our mistakes. They had come to the galaxy not as conquerors. They had come as something more interesting and in many ways more remarkable, a species that had earned the right to take whatever it wanted and chose instead to ask. Hybrid shadows will never forget the day humanity stopped being quiet, or the very specific, very deliberate way they made certain we understood why we should hope they never have reason to stop being polite. My name is Velcro, and if there is one thing 14 cycles of trade negotiation for the Hastron Collective have taught me, it is this: everyone is lying to you. The only variable is how well. 14 cycles. Long enough to spot a fraudulent mineral contract buried inside 300 pages of diplomatic language. Long enough to recognize a particular smile a delegate wears when they are about to offer you something worthless wrapped in flattery. Long enough to read a species within 30 seconds of walking into a room with them. Or so I believed. What happened at Meridian 7 during those 3 extraordinary days would dismantle every assumption I had carefully constructed over a career I had been proud of. It would rewrite my understanding of power, of strength, of what it truly means to be civilized. And it would introduce a galaxy to a species that had been watching us, studying us, and quietly waiting for the right moment to say hello, a species that had spent decades learning exactly how to be polite, precisely because they understood what happened when they stopped. But I am getting ahead of myself. Meridian 7 is a kind of place that exists because no one trusts anyone else enough to meet on their own territory. It hangs in neutral space like a deliberate afterthought, positioned at the intersection of 9 major civilizational zones, architecturally designed to offend no one and comfort no one in equal measure. Smooth gray corridors, diffuse lighting calibrated to no particular species' visual spectrum, climate systems that maintain a temperature everyone finds mildly unpleasant rather than genuinely unbearable. The Hastron delegation had lodged a formal complaint about the humidity on 17 separate occasions. The complaints were filed, acknowledged, and ignored with remarkable consistency. This was democracy in action, galactic style. The grand summit hall that morning was packed with a kind of energy that only exists when power is openly at stake and everyone knows it. The Theron delegation had arranged themselves in a gleaming cluster near the center of the chamber, their crystalline exoskeletons fracturing the overhead light into prismatic displays that were either beautiful or deeply ostentatious depending on your mood. Ambassador Threx and his Kelvich consortium had commandeered half the seating area, the 17 bodies of his hive mind cluster arranged in their characteristic semicircle, humming with that constant low vibration that meant they were simultaneously present in the conversation and conferring privately among themselves. Even the Yulthar had emerged from their atmospheric chambers, those ancient gas cloud beings who treated physical displacement as a personal insult, which told you everything about how significant this summit was considered to be. I was seated with a Hastron delegation near the diplomatic core section, reviewing my notes and nursing a beverage that the station's catering system insisted was compatible with my biology, when the chamber doors opened. 3 humans walked in. Just 3. No entourage. No secondary translators. No cultural advisors or legal specialists or the 12-person support staff that most developing species brought to their first major council appearance, partly for practical support and partly to signal that they took the proceedings seriously. 3 people, a modest data case between them, and the kind of unhurried confidence that made the back of your mind start asking uncomfortable questions. The one leading them drew the eye immediately. Marcus Webb, as I would later learn his name, was average height by human standards, which turned out to be surprisingly tall by galactic ones, though none of us had the context to appreciate that yet. He wore a dark formal suit that sat somewhere between military precision and civilian elegance, and his expression carried that particular quality of careful neutrality that I recognized from years of watching skilled negotiators work a room. Dark complexion, silver threading through the hair at his temples, and a smile positioned perfectly on his face, the kind of smile that exists as a professional tool rather than an emotional expression. It was polished. It was practiced. And his eyes, calm and assessing behind it, were doing something altogether different from what his mouth was suggesting. Behind him came a woman built with a kind of physical density that made you revise your estimates twice. Nina Torres moved with an economy of motion that spoke of either extensive training or natural physical confidence. Probably both, I would later understand. She was not large by the standards of the species in that room. She was compact in the way that certain materials are compact, dense with potential energy that the casual observer might mistake for stillness. The third human, Dr. James Park, was older, carrying a data tablet with the possessive grip of someone who considers information to be a form of armor. He was cataloging the room with quiet, methodical attention, his gaze moving from delegation to delegation with an expression of scholarly interest that I would eventually recognize as something far more strategic than it appeared. They took their seats in the probationary member section, the back rows, the diplomatic equivalent of being asked to stand near the wall at a party, and Marcus Webb folded his hands in his lap and waited with an expression of perfect patience. Ambassador Threx wasted no time. "The newcomers," he announced, his translation device rendering his tone in the particular register he reserved for species he intended to manage. "We are so very pleased you could join us. I trust the journey was not too taxing. I understand that faster-than-light travel can present certain challenges for species still working through the mathematics of it." The insult was immaculate. No rude words, no raised voice, just pure, crystalline condescension gift-wrapped in diplomatic courtesy. Marcus Webb nodded. The smile remained exactly where it was. "We managed just fine, Ambassador. The journey only took us 8 days from Earth, all things considered." 8 days. I caught the number but did not process it immediately, which is something I have thought about often since. 8 days from their home system to Meridian 7. The mathematics were right there, waiting to be done. Nobody did them. We were all too comfortable in our assumptions. "Remarkable," Threx continued, leaning into his performance. "Your species claims to have achieved interstellar capability in under a century. Most civilizations require at least 3 before transitioning from their first atmospheric flight to functional FTL travel. Your engineers must be quite exceptional.